The final update to Iceborne is here, and with it comes one of the toughest challenges in the game. Fatalis the Black Dragon will test even the best of hunters, so I'm Darcblade with an Anti-Fatalis build for the Greatsword in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now as always, a anti-build, sometimes referred to as a counter build, is a build that is made to take on a specific monster in the game. And whilst in all honesty Fatalis can be taken on with any set, the builds featured in this series are aimed to make the hunt more manageable. When it comes to the Greatsword, timing is key. Thanks to the slow movement and swing animations of the weapon, you have to make every hit count. But if you're successful and true with your attacks, then you're going to hit Fatalis incredibly hard, potentially finishing the hunt quite quickly. The more experienced you get with the Greatsword, as well as the Fatalis hunt, the better you'll get with the Greatsword, and ultimately the hunt will become easier and easier. The Anti-Fatalis Greatsword build I'm featuring in this episode is primarily a DPS build that has quality of life skills. So for this build, you'll need the Frostfang Helm beta, the Golden Loon Mail beta, the Brachydium Braces beta, Golden Loon Coil beta, and the Brachydium Greaves beta. I'm also using a Challenger Charm 5, and for my weapon I'm using the Elatrion Revolution. This has an attack increase augmentation and health regen augmentation. As for the specialist tools, I've gone for the Temporal and Rocksteady mantles for defensive purposes as always. As for the jewels, you've got a fair few to play around with, so I've gone for Destroyer jewels for the Part Breaker skill, Jumping jewels for the Evade Extender skill, Expert jewels for Critical Eye, Attack jewels for Attack Boost, Tenderizer jewels for Weakness Exploit, Charger jewels for the Focus skill, Vitality jewels for Health Boost, and a Fortitude jewel for the Fortify skill. As for the jewels on our mantles, I've gone for Heavy Artillery jewels for the Heavy Artillery skill. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have the build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which as always will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You'll have a raw attack of 1498 with a decent chunk of purple sharpness. You have 25% base affinity, which can be 95% when you take into account weakness exploits as well as the agitator buff being in effect. You'll have a Dragon Elemental rating of 810 with low Elder Seal, and you'll have an OK defense of 1053 that is strong against fire and dragon but weak to the other elements. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you have Agitator at level 7. This is a buff that kicks in whenever a monster becomes enraged. When that happens, you'll gain increased raw attack as well as base affinity. And with Iceborne, it's easy to control when a monster becomes enraged thanks to the whole flint shot mechanics, so it's a useful skill to both increase your raw attack and affinity. Next is Divine Blessing at level 5, one of our defensive skills in this build that gives us a chance at taking reduced damage whenever we take a hit from a monster. This isn't guaranteed to reduce the damage, but it definitely helps. You have Attack Boost at level 4, increasing the raw attack of this build, and at level 4 or above it will also provide us an extra 5% base affinity. You have Critical Eye level 4, which is a skill that increases the base affinity of this build. You have Weakness Exploit level 3, which is a skill that increases our affinity whenever we're attacking monster weak points. And should these weak points be tenderized through Clutch Claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity is even greater. As always, Weakness Exploit at level 3 can provide us a bonus 50% extra affinity. You have Health Boost at level 3, allowing our health to get to that maximum of 200. You have Focus level 3, which is kind of an essential quality of life skill for the Greatsword. Focus basically allows us to charge weapons up more quickly, and this of course with the Greatsword applies to all our charge slash attacks, which ultimately means that we can perform them more often, increasing our overall DPS. You have Part Breaker level 3, which is a useful skill for the Fatalis hunt. Basically, there is an aspect of the hunt where you need to break Fatalis's horns. If you don't break at least one horn by phase 3, then Fatalis's flames will turn blue, enabling it to pretty much one-shot hunters. Part Breaker basically increases the likelihood that we're able to break monster body parts and survive the later phases. You have Evade Extender level 3, which is an optional quality of life skill I've used for the Greatsword that increases the distance at which we roll. You can of course replace this with something more defensive or offensive if you so desire, but if you do, replace the Jumping jewels we have on this build. Anyway, you have Fortify level 1, which is a useful skill for tough hunts. Basically every time you cart and faint, you'll come back to the hunt with increased raw attack and defense. This buff can be applied twice to a hunter. And finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have Heavy Artillery level 2, which increases the damage of the artillery found in Shrade Castle, so cannons and ballistas and such, by 100%. So always make sure you have a mantle ready before using them. As for the set bonuses, we'll have 3 of them. First of all is the Gold Rathian Essence, Divine Blessing Secret, allowing us to get the Divine Blessing skill from level 3 to level 5, so it increases the chance we'll take reduced damage even more. You'll also have the Brachydios Will, Agitator Secret, allowing us to get the Agitator skill from level 5 to a maximum of level 7, and finally you'll have the Frostfang Absolute Art Punishing Draw, which is a skill that gives our draw attacks a stun effect as well as increased raw attack. So there we have it, that is the build I recommend for taking on Fatalis with the Greatsword. Now of course, like I said, it is not entirely focused on one area. I know a lot of Greatsword users like to focus entirely on offense, but for me personally, I wanted to add some quality of life to this build, as for me personally, I don't feel I'm that good with the Greatsword. The quality of life skills basically just helped me get the hunt done more effectively with this weapon. But every build out there has pros and cons. When it comes to the pros with this build, one of its biggest pros is its damage output, namely its raw damage output. Combining Agitator, Attack Boost, Weakness Exploit and Critical Eye, we're able to hit Fatalis quite hard with our charged attacks. On top of that, this build has quality of life skills from Health Boost, Focus, Part Breaker and Evade Extender. It all helps counter the Greatsword's shortcomings and make the hunt feel a little bit more easier than it is. And finally for the pros is that this weapon doesn't really have to worry about sharpness whatsoever. Yes, we don't have Master's Touch or Protected Polish or anything like that, but because we're hitting Fatalis so infrequently, it means rarely should you have to sharpen the weapon. But unfortunately there are cons to every build out there. One of the biggest cons for this build is its lack of defensive skills. It lacks Evade Window, Defense Boost. The only real one it has is Divine Blessing, which means you're at risk, especially if Divine Blessing doesn't kick in when you take a hit. And on top of that, the other con, which is more of a con for the Greatsword itself, which is timing is everything with this build and this weapon. You'll have very few opportunities to deal massive damage to Fatalis' head, so you have to take every opportunity that is available to you. If you capitalise on this, hit the head when you can, break the horns, then you should be able to finish this hunt. But regardless, this build is strong, especially if you do master the timing aspects of this build as well as the Fatalis hunt itself with the weapon. The quality of life skills it has definitely counter the slow movement aspects of this weapon, and this combined with its strong DPS allows it to take on the Fatalis hunt quite effectively. So there we have it, that is the build I recommend for taking on Fatalis with the Greatsword. Of course, as you farm the monster more and more, you'll get Fatalis weaponry and gear, which is some of the best in the game, and should allow you to do the hunt more easily. But until then, this build will work just fine. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you an Anti-Fatalis build for the Greatsword in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.